So I think we can get started in the interest of time while others continue to join. So I think we can get started in the interest of time while others continue to join. Okay, it is.
That's fine by me.
Okay. So welcome to the IEEE Distinguished Lecture Series. This is the IEEE Computer Society Silicon Valley chapter. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. IEEE Computer Society Silicon Valley chapter has over 4,000 subscribers in our mailing list. We have 1,400 plus paid members and a strong following of over 12,300 on Twitter alone. Ours is the largest chapter in the IEEE section. We are uniquely positioned by virtue of location and available experience, and that is one of the reasons probably we are able to attract great speakers like Dr. Cyril, who will be talking today on a security audit framework for security management in the enterprise. The talk will explain the difficulty in conducting security audits in organizations. The talk will specifically focus on enterprises whose services and networks span multiple domains, boundaries, use cloud and on-prem services, and are hosted across several geographies. This will include using the speaker's proposed conceptual security audit framework to show how organizations can conduct appropriate security audits. Further, it will provide insights into the essential audits, the requirements necessary for efficient audits. This includes type of security audits, things to consider before conducting a security audit, general guidelines in performing security audits, and audit trail analysis. This talk should be suitable to both business executives and technical audiences, including CEOs, CISOs, administrators, information technology professionals, software engineering, and architecture stakeholders. So there's a poll that is flashing on your screen, hopefully. Zoom should be flashing it on your screen. So if you can please take the poll and let us know your background, that would be great. Dr. Cyril Onwubiko is Director, Artificial Intelligence, Blockchain, and Cybersecurity at Research Series Limited, where he directs strategy and governance in artificial intelligence, blockchain, and cybersecurity. Prior to Research Series, he had worked in the financial services, telecommunication, health, government, public service sectors. He is a leading scholar in cyber situational awareness, cybersecurity, security information and event management, data fusion, cybersecurity operation centers, and vastly knowledgeable in information assurance. His work in artificial intelligence, especially machine learning for cybersecurity, demonstrates an ability to converge multiple applications of artificial intelligence across business units and in many domains like natural language processing, deep learning, machine learning, and data science, and so on, and applying these models to solve real-world problems. He holds a Ph.D. in computer network security from Kingston University, London, MSc in Internet Engineering, and BSc in Computer Science and Mathematics. His research interests are in the areas of cybersecurity, situational awareness, cyber threat intelligence, security operations center, blockchain, and AI. He has authored several books, including Security Framework for Attack Detection in Computer Networks and Concepts in Numerical Methods. He co-edited the book on situational awareness in computer networks defense. He is the editor of the Cyber Science series and editor-in-chief of the International Journal on Cyber Situational Awareness. Cyril has authored several book chapters and has published over 30 peer-reviewed articles in leading academic journals and conferences. He is a senior member of the IEEE, currently the Secretary, IEEE United Kingdom and Ireland. Once again, welcome to this event by IEEE Computer Society Silicon Valley chapter. My name is Vishnu Pendyala. I am currently the secretary of the chapter. The links to the video and slides will be posted on our website in about a week. The video is also going to be available on IEEE TV, and it's being streamed live on YouTube. Please feel free to post your questions on the chat window, and I should be able to relay them to the speaker. So with that small note, let us get started, and I will give the control over to Cyril. Cyril, all over to you.
Thanks, Vishnu. Thanks for that introduction. Much appreciated. Before I get started, I also want to say a very heartfelt thank you to Paul Westlin for inviting me to present this distinguished lecture to the IEEE Computer Society Silicon Valley chapter. Thank you, Paul. All right, what I will be saying today would be about security audit. And many of us sat in the room and are going to watch this will be thinking, is security audit an IT problem? No, it's not an IT problem. Security audit has become a very complex business undertaking, and I'll explain why it is so. But on the other hand, is an essential business resilience. So what it means is that for you to conduct a proper and effective security audit, especially for digital services that operate in the cloud, that span various geographies and provinces, that work in a way that has various supply chain interaction in the middle of that, it is very complex to undertake that. But on the other hand, is an enabling business opportunity for improving business controls, effectiveness, and also for business resilience. The motivation for this work is that today, organizational services operate in many geographies. So for example, if you're hosting services in the cloud provider could have multiple data centers in various geographies. They could also follow the Sun model where services are supported from different geographies. But mind you, as the business owner, you're still the overarching risk owner of that business. Therefore, regardless where that business services are provided from, you are equally obliged to ensure that the services are maintained in the right way. You are still obliged to adhere to both the local and international regulatory mandates that allow you to operate. Security audit has become so important that for some organizations in some verticals, it dictates whether they operate or not. What that means is that it has now become an enabling business requirement for certain business organizations. It is so complex that there are many suppliers in the ecosystem. There are suppliers that provide you software services. There are vendors and partners that provide you solutions that allow your business to work. Each of those have their own responsibility and accountability for your service. Without a security audit, it will be difficult to ascertain the relationship and the responsibility of each supplier within the ecosystem. But that is complex in its own right. Where is the handoff between one service ownership and responsibility to the other? Where is the liability of one service provider and partner within the ecosystem for your service. The RACI is now very broad. And RACI, I mean here, is who is responsible, who needs to be informed, who needs to be consulted, and who is ultimately accountable. Regulatory mandates span up now and again. If I use the US, for example, if I run my services in California, I will be obliged by the CCPA, which is the California Confidential Privacy Act, which may not be in another city within the same country. Therefore, if I operate and host my services in California, I will be now obliged to adhere to the CCPA. I would equally be obliged to also adhere and maintain the information reporting in case my services are breached. Therefore, with all of these myriads of various regulation, you as the business owner, you as the business accountability is responsible for ensuring that these regulatory and legislative mandates are maintained and your organizations adhere to it. If you operate in the European Union, for example, you would be obliged with the GDPR, which is the general protection regulation for general data. Also, for businesses that are in highly regulated verticals, you might want to list on a particular compliance, and you might want to also undertake cyber insurance. They would mandate you to carry out security audit. If you work in financial institutions, for example, banks or insurance, you might be obliged to comply to a PCI DSS, which is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and they require you to carry out regular audits for your attestation. And your cyber insurance would also want you to carry out security audit for you to renew your cyber insurance or enlist a new one. What about cost optimization and business efficiency? You use the audit to establish whether there is cost reduction in certain areas. For example, when you carry out security audit, you will find out whether some controls are working as they should work. Which I will speak and I will touch in more details later today, is about control effectiveness and control efficacy. Is the controls working as they should? Should I not swap them? Are they redundant? Where is the cost savings? Where is the business efficiency in terms of business process efficiency? And overall, who owns and who is liable within the supply chain and stakeholder ecosystem? With this, you can now see why security audit is not an IT problem. IT here, I mean information technology, is actually a business opportunity. And that's one thing I would like you guys to take away today, because people will look at it and think, oh, cybersecurity or security audit, as a matter of fact, is an IT problem. No, it's not. It's a business enabler. It enables business operation, enables business efficiency, enables business to operate by adhering to requirement and regulatory compliance within their vertical. If you operate in medical aspects, there are a number of audits they would ask you to carry out in order to make sure that you're not using personal identifiable data or personal health data in your undertaking. And if you do, there are requirements in order to safeguard those pieces of personal information that are important. You now see why this undertaking security audit is an enabler and also helps with the business. And therefore, it is a business proposition, it's a business opportunity, it's a business differentiation. Why do we carry out audit? So you'll be thinking security audit is about only the technical controls. No, it spans through auditing your policies, whether an enterprise, whether your organization actually do even have policies. What are the guidelines? What does the policy stipulate? Does the policy get updated And how frequently does it update? Is the policy in itself provide the real guidance for people to read and understand? What about the processes and the practices? So the processes are there to provide the guardrails in which you operate. But what if the practices you do not adhere to the policies and the processes? How about the operation? Where you operate from, where your business operates in terms of the vertical, does it adhere and oblige to the regulatory and legislative mandates within that particular vertical? Are the operations, what the business operations adhere and agree with the policies that you stipulated, and also the processes and practices that supposedly should guide how you operate? How about the effectiveness of the controls? How about the effectiveness of the policy? Is the policy overarching and confusing and complicated that even employees will find it difficult to navigate? Is it atomic and prescriptive? Is it comprehensible? Have you consulted people to look at the effectiveness of it? So you'll be thinking effectiveness of control is only technical. No, it's about the people, the procedure, the processes, the policy, the operation. It's about effectiveness that allows your business to be resilient in the face of adversity, to continue in the face if there is a security attack and if there's a security breach. By carrying an audit is actually helping business as a preventative and also a detective control. It's preventative in the sense that it tells you what has not happened by showing you the gap. It may be a process gap or technology gap or procedure gap, so that the business can then remediate it. Did you know that if you do not carry out security audit, somebody else would expose those weaknesses for you? And I don't think you want to be in that side. It's also detective in the sense that when you conduct security audit, you're able to detect where there are gaps. You'll be able to detect the threats before they are realized. So that is why we carry out security audit. Audit in general also conducted in various other areas, like financial audit, to ensure that you comply with regulatory requirement within the financial sector. You can also carry out medical audit to see the functioning and adherence of the medical practices of that particular establishment. So in general, whether it is security audit or audits in general, it is a business enabling preposition that allows of the efficiency and effectiveness of the business. And it should be actually treated as an important artifact within the collateral of the business enterprise. The question is then, how do you conduct an effective audit? And you'll be thinking, I've done so many audits, or I don't know how to do it. That's fine. Neither of those is bad. An effective audit starts from the first thing, setting clear goals. What are the goals we want to achieve with this audit? Is this audit going to be used for our cyber insurance or insurance renewal or premium? In which case, clearly articulate what the goal. Is it the audit to carry out continuous improvement, enable the business to improve in its cost efficiency or business efficiency? That needs to be articulated. So the first thing you do is to agree the goals. What are the goals for this audit? The second thing you do is to define the scope. As an enterprise, you would have many areas of your business. You would have areas of operation, you would have products or services that you sell. You have employee or staff. You also have consumers. Is the scope to audit the infrastructure that supports the business? Is the scope to audit the products and services that you render to your consumers? It needs to be clearly defined. And because the enterprise today, as I said, is complex, i.e. services are hosted in multiple cloud data centers, services are no longer rendered by yourself alone. You might render those services using subsidiaries and intermediaries. You might also use people within the ecosystem or partners and vendors that form an ecosystem. Therefore, what scope of the audit are you going to conduct? Is it about the employee, the infrastructure, the practices, your product space, or the consumer space? My advice would be to agree the scope, but also agree, a tiered approach. Rather than a big bang approach where you do everything, it'd be nice to agree succinct, measurable scope so that when you finish the audit, you can understand the quantifiable, measurable risks and what controls you put in place to remedy those risks. And by phasing it out in different chunks, it's easy to manage, and you can show results, empirical data that shows the scopes you have done. But let's not go into that there. Let's just talk about what else you do once you've agreed the scope. You then conduct the audit. And conducting the audit allows you to identify the gaps. What are the gaps? And what are the threats? So the gaps could be that you don't have some things that you're supposed to have. For example, you may well mean that there are some policies that your organization doesn't have. And that's fine. What you then need to do is to plan how are you going to remediate that. So once you've conducted the audits, you will come out with a set of gaps and a set of threats. Then what you do in the fourth area is to evaluate the risks from the gaps and the threats you found. And the reason for evaluating that is very important. You wonder why. You might identify too many gaps that is not easy to fix immediately. Therefore, you have to prioritize those. And prioritization is very important, is very, very key. So you would then prioritize it based on the severity of the gaps that were found, and also the importance of the assets in which those risks may be realized. Let me give you one example. If you're an e-commerce business, so you sell services to end users, a direct-to-consumer business model, if you found a risk on your payment engine that would allow somebody to take payments or make payments that is not authorized, that is a bigger risk compared to, for example, that you do not have standard policies for onboarding new employer. So you would have to prioritize those risks you found based on the severity and also the impact to your business. Again, buttressing the point that this is a business opportunity and business problem rather than IT. And finally, what you do, once you've prioritized, identify the risks and prioritize the risk, what you then do is to then identify the controls which would then mitigate those risks to a very minimal and acceptable residual risk. So for an audit to be effective, one, you need to agree goals. Two, you need to define the scope. Three, you need to conduct the audit to identify the gaps and the threats. Four, You need to evaluate the risk and prioritize those risks, and then finally provide the right countermeasures, which are the controls, to reduce the aperture of that risk to a minimal set. Following on, what we've then done is to develop this framework that allows us to then systematically carry out an audit. This framework it sits on the National Institute of Standards and Technology NIST framework, the CSF framework, which is the cybersecurity framework. So for anyone who is not familiar with that, the cybersecurity framework is underpinned on 5 building blocks: the identify building block, the detect building block, the protect, respond, and recover. What does that mean? It means that we want to know the things, identify the things, the controls that help us identify who the user is, what the asset is, what the risks are. And we need to evaluate the controls also that allow us to detect, and the controls that allow us to protect, and the ones that allow us to respond and recover. And the reason you have the respond and recover is because there is no silver bullet. Cybersecurity is about protecting critical services, but we know that bad things also happen, hence why there are security breaches and incidents. But when they do happen, what do you do? How do you respond? And if things happen so badly, how do you recover from those incidents, from those security breaches? So this framework then, sitting on the CFS framework, identifies what we need to do in order to do a comprehensive security audit. But encompasses 4 areas that is very important: the process, the policy, the operations, and the practice. Conducting an audit means that we look through the various protection mechanisms that are there and audit those in order to identify the gaps and ultimately mitigate those gaps. So we looked at the access protection. What do you use to protect your authentication and authorization mechanisms? What do you use for your physical protection? For example, in a high fidelity facility, you may have CCTV, you may have cameras that monitor in and out of different entities into those premises. You may also have authentication badges that authenticate who comes into those facilities. You might also have an attendee register that records who is on site and who doesn't. You may also have other protocols that are adhered in terms of somebody who have authorized their visit into that place. So these are some of the physical controls. But you are auditing those physical controls, as an example, against both the policy and the practice. The policy might say something else, but in practice, something else is done. You also want to audit the systems and network protection. You also want to audit the service protection. What protects the service in its entirety? You may also want to audit the data protection. What protects the data? Because the data might be sitting in another fabric, in another container. So whilst the container audit might be fine, or the fabric, but the actual data itself may not. You want to also audit this against some of the compliance requirements within your jurisdiction, within your geography, and also within the ecosystem that you operate, and also the vertical in which your business operates. You may want to also audit the supply chain. And these days that everything is software ecosystem is so large. And it's a myriad of so many things: software as a service, OSS, open software stack, shift left licenses that you cannot modify, and licenses that are non-perpetual and those that are perpetual. So the software ecosystem is a very complex ecosystem in its own right, and something that requires probably another distinguished talk. You also may want to audit your business continuity processes. Largely, we are always assured that there is business continuity process there. The surprise happens when you audit that to find out that A, it was there, but it doesn't work as it should. It's non-functional. It just exists in a continuum. And that's not something you want to find out if you already breached or hacked. And it's not something you want to find out if you accidentally lost a data center through natural occurrence or something, only to find out that the backup data center doesn't work or is not at pair, the primary one. Again, it may well mean it's not just about data center in terms of the hosting. It could also be your intellectual property where it's stored. So for example, the recipe in which a particular provider uses to produce their product might be sitting somewhere. If you lost it, it's not an IT problem, it's a business survivability problem. How do you recreate that recipe in order to produce your products and services? Where is the resiliency? But you need to also monitor those things in order to know whether they work or not. So you may want to audit your security monitoring and also your security incident response, recovery capabilities. And you may be wondering, yeah, with all of those, would we be ever breached? It's a matter of time. Therefore, it's good to have your breach protocol in place so that if they does happen, at least your communication protocols are there, your reporting protocols are there, and you have a succinct message to your customers because you've already prepared this and rehearsed it. And these are the things that we audit when you carry out audit. Lastly, but not the least, is how effective are each and every one of these controls. And that is the control efficacy that you want to put in place as part of your audit. So we talked about the framework, but what we want to also talk about is the different types of audit. Bearing in mind that you're using security audit for many things, we mentioned about renewing your cyber insurance as an example. You also want to use it as your attestation to certain compliance regiment or mandate. You also want to use it for your business optimization. You also may want to use it for your service improvement. Therefore, there are different types of audit or security audit you may want to conduct. So we start with two broad categories. The first one is the internal one. As the word says, is internal. This is the one that the organization does by itself. So you could automate all of this, but the internal one are mostly automated. So you can automate your continuous audit so that it continuously audits the environment, the services, and the products. And then the output of those are followed up. You may want to also conduct via vulnerability assessment, which is also automated. So these are some of the examples within the internal one. Or you want to audit your equivalence audit in terms of your reciprocal obligations to some of the requirements. The other type of largely broad type of security audit is external. This is where you invite an independent external provider to undertake the auditing themselves. We normally do that when there is a compliance that requires or stipulates that is being done, it should be done by an external provider. So like a compliance audit. So for example, some of the requirements, say the PCI DSS requirement or cyber insurance requirement, may oblige that you hire or contract an external independent, the word is independent, that is not you, that can validate and verify that that audit was conducted. And also that will give you a certificate of doing that. And also can share that report with an external or the regulator. So for compliance audits, it's advisable to use an external independent organization. Another type of external type audit is the penetration testing. So where an independent organization will come in and do the assessment, write some of the codes, test some of your environment, and then give you a report of the gaps or the threats or the risks in which they're found. So largely there are two types of, broadly speaking, two types, internal, external. But there are many different of those. And you could also do your penetration test in-house or internal. It does not mean that every single penetration testing is done by an external. I think the differentiation here is what purpose is the audit going to serve, and what does the regulators that require that audit stipulate? An insurance company, in order to be independent and to the fidelity of the report, they might want an external independent party to carry out the audit. Therefore, based on what the regulator stipulates, then you would have to enlist the services of an external service provider or audit provider to do that. We mentioned about the requirements and the various compliance and standards. So security audit is being woven into so many compliance and so many standards. They are there to guide. They're there to help the business as a business safeguard mechanism. So it's important to see it in that light rather than to see it as onerous ask or request, but to see it as a service improvement and business resilience requirement. So some of the standards are well known by most of you. The payment card industry is one that does require you to undertake, regular or continuous security audit. And many other one, SOX, COVID, CCPA, the California Confidentiality and Privacy Act, and also the Breach Information Act and the EU General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. These are some of it's not comprehensive. There are a number of other ones that require you to conduct. So if you work in the sector that require strict regulation and directives, you might be required. And also cyber insurance does require you to conduct regular security testing and audits. So the audit trail analysis is very important artifact within security audit. What is showing is that if you had an incident, what generally happens is you want to know what happened with that incident. You want to know who, as in the entity that carried out that incident or security breach. You also want to know when, in terms of time, that incident happened. You also want to know where, in terms of which asset was breached or was compromised. You also want to know what you can do to remedy. So when we carry audit trail analysis, is part of security monitoring that allow us to say, if we had a breach, what do we know about that security breach? What do we know about that security incident? The how, the who, the what, the when, the where, and which. That is what you put together with an audit trail analysis. How does that happen? So you would audit the policies you put in place. So you would say that policy is there, and that policy says if there's any deviation from certain guidelines and rules, this is what you do. Therefore, the audit will audit you based on the defined security principles and policies and guidelines. It will look at abnormal things, things that are not normal. So they may be abnormal, but are equally symptomatic. They are just saying there is a likelihood that this is. So it's not very crystal clear sometimes, but it's a likelihood that this is something that may have happened. It would then point you into some of the gaps, controls that may have failed that led to that. So these are some of the things you put together as part of doing your audit trail analysis. And eventually, with the security monitoring overlay into it, you can then correlate those events to see that it could have happened in different places, i.e. One incident could have multiple events and could have touched multiple assets, but bringing it together will give you a situational awareness, a picture that allow you to identify what other assets may have been breached, and what time was it, and whether they are related to one singular incident or multiple incidents. The last one I want to touch before we go, and most people don't talk about it, is how effective are your controls? So the important thing to take, one of the utilities of this talk again today is that you're not just auditing to find the gaps and the threats and the risk so that you can mitigate it. It's also auditing the controls in which you pay a lot of reliance on to make sure that they work as they should work. And where they're not working, then that's a gap on its own right. Where they're working suboptimal is that culture of continuous improvement, and also ensuring there is a need for each control. You don't put a control just because you need to, you have to put a control, but is what does that control give you? What benefit does that control provide? In the overarching efficiency of the business, do I need to have that? What does it provide? And in what way can I improve it? That is one thing to ensure with the effectiveness of a control. And that could actually lead to cost optimization, and also look to reducing the residual risk if you placed and if the controls are efficient and effective. The final bit of my talk will be how you manage security audit. As I said before, it's not an IT problem, and equally, it's not a problem that only revolves around technical things. There are process and procedural things. For example, how is the security awareness culture in the organization? Do people know what to do and what not to do? Do you test regularly? Do you have protocols for managing incident? Do you have clear governance in the organization? Do people know where to contact, who to contact, or where to contact if something happens? These are very important things, as equally as important as conducting the audit yourself. So in summary, because I want to give you 20 minutes before to ask your questions. In conclusion, security audit provides us a number of business benefits. So It's a business control. It provides business opportunity. It gives business the differentiation and enables business. It helps in terms of survivability for those that operate in highly regulated that require that for them to operate. We don't just do security audit when a breach has occurred, a security incident has occurred. It's supposed to be a culture that is woven into your security management so that it happens continuously. It's supposed to be baked into your security practices, and you need to conduct security audit regularly. It's advisable to automate security audit so that it's there and it runs like every other service that you run. And there is a need to follow up to make sure that the controls that you've put in place are optimal, they're efficient, and they're effective. Before I take your questions, I want to highlight two things. One is the conference we're hosting in the UK in Cardiff. It's next year, June 20 and 21. The call for paper is on February 28th. If you're interested, it's a multidisciplinary conference. It's called Cyber Science. If you're interested, the website is there, is simric.org. Again, I will share these slides with Vishnu and Paul, and they will make it available to all of the listeners, and I'll post this also on social media. The other one is our cyber recovery framework. So this recovery framework is already on public preview. So, and is made available for free use. You can use it and carry out security recovery operational work for your own company. And the URL is there, cyberframework.simric.com. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening, and I'll take your questions now.
Yeah, thanks for that enlightening talk, Cyril. It was really very insightful. There's one question on the chat window. This is regarding the privacy requirements, particularly California requirements. So the question reads, you mentioned the California requirements. Would a company have the option of not establishing a presence in California and thus not come under the regulation, even if some customers reside in the state? What options are there for opting out of a set of requirements?
Very interesting question. I'm not a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and do my best. So the first thing first is to read what the regulation mandates. So the regulation mandates if you're providing service in California. So if you operate in California and the citizens and residents in California use your service, then you have to adhere to that, to CCPA, okay? There's also the disclosure, breach disclosure that also is in California. So if your services are hosted there and you render services to citizens there, i.e. the business is registered there or any arm of the business operates there, then you are obliged to also the CSBIA, which is also the Breach Notification Act. So that's what it is. Can you avoid it? Can you circumvent it? I'm just going to tell you that if you operate in those areas, to be a good citizen, you have to oblige to those. The only way it might not be your responsibility is if you host a service there and the service provider that is hosting the service for you, say for example, AWS, Amazon Web Services, or any of the three big cloud providers like Azure, Microsoft Azure, or Google GCP, if they already have that mandate and they maintain it, and they are ready to pass it on to the customers, their customers. So if you're one of their customers, you would then inherit it. It means that they can pass it on to you through consuming services and using their compliance to then provide service in that city. But it's something to actually read what the regulators specify.
So along the lines, CCPA is pretty much modeled on GDPR, or they are quite similar.
They are very similar.
I'm pretty sure you would have operated in an environment which is typical in California as well. So how do the privacy concerns or privacy regulations impact your security audits typically?
Good question. Very good. So they do. So when you are doing security audit, as I explained, you audit various controls. So one of your controls is you're auditing against that compliance. And that compliance says, how do you use personally identifiable data, PII, or what we call in the US, personally identifiable information, okay? So if you are seeking consent from the consumers and your customers, and you can evidence consent for their services, and that the data is held within their geography, within the regulation, and that you yourself is signed up to that art and you maintain it, then you are auditing against that particular directive, against that particular mandate. So that's how you would audit against the CCPA, for example, or GDPR. But audit in general, you can audit that compliance, but you can also audit the infrastructure and the services that house the data. Remember, there is a data itself, but there's infrastructure. So when you're auditing the infrastructure, you may be auditing them on a set of different controls, which is there any vulnerability in those infrastructure? Did they have controls to prevent a threat from exploiting those data? So the compliance is one place, but also the security of the fabric and the database and the systems that house the data needs to also be audited against it not being open and being secure to hold those type of data.
Thank you.
That's all right.
So any other questions? I don't see any questions on YouTube as of now. So audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, because now we are done with the lecture, so you don't have to use the chat window necessarily. You can ask the question directly. So in the meantime, I'll ask a question, Cyril. So in your experience, how cooperating are the employees with these audits? Because you are exposing their environment, right? So do they cooperate well with the auditors? Or?
Yes, so thanks, Vishnu. That's why on the security management, we talked about things like security awareness. Do the users even know what to expect? Have you told them about the security audit that's been going to come? Do the people who are the custodians who manage those areas? So when you are, I'll walk you through what an audit is. Assuming you bring an external auditor, I did tell you during the talk that there are 5 areas you look into. The first one is agreeing the goal, but the second one is important, which is the scope. So if you are a database administrator and the scope of that audit is about auditing the database of the administration of the school or organization, we would have informed you to say that this auditor that is coming is going to be speaking to you. Are you aware of where your processes are? Are you aware of what you do to demonstrate that you do the right thing? So that's where the user education and security awareness also plays into it, to prepare people, not just preparing them for the audit, but have it as a culture, security culture that is embedded in that organization. Therefore, you're not just doing it because the auditor is coming tomorrow or next tomorrow, but is aware of behavior, is acceptable norm within your organization. You see what I mean? It's baked in also because you can automate some of those audits. And if they come, you're only going to provide them with evidence. So there is no need of even having pre-meets over pre-meets, because people behave that way. People know where your policies are on their intranet or your portal. The policies define what they're supposed to use. For example, you shouldn't share your account with somebody else. Everybody should have one unique account that they use for their IT services. That's one example. The other example is also for the, say, people in commerce or in finance area is also that they have a transparent ins and outgoings of the finances of the organization. So if they want to look at the financial hygiene, they will just go to the CFO or to the finance person. So it's a business proposition. It's not an IT thing. Even the majority of the times, they speak to IT people. They also speak to non-IT people to understand whether they've even gone through security awareness training, whether they go through some of the certification. So that's how we approach it. We approach it by mass publication, communication to the organization, running periodic security awareness programs and education. So that way people know.
Yeah, thank you. I was also curious as to how you apply machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques in cybersecurity. I teach machine learning in San Jose State University, so I'm naturally curious about that. If you can give some more insights.
That's really good. So there are two ways. The first one is we apply security regardless of what the domain is, because the machine learning uses data. The data you use, is it secure? Can people poison the data, adversarial machine learning? Can people manipulate that data so that the predictions are different? The normal IT things. Do you have model office? Do you have production office? Do you have pre-prod? So with machine learning, do you separate the data, machine learning data, training sets, validation sets from the pre-production sets? Who can log into those? Who have access to those environments? So the normal security still goes across the machine learning data set. The other data set is when you're using open source framework. So for example, you might decide to use GoogleNet, for example, if you are into deep learning. Are you making sure that the new libraries and the new frameworks you import, have you scanned it against malicious modification? Have you scanned it against adversarial ML? Can somebody change those frameworks so that your prediction would vary and different? The other aspect we apply in terms of cybersecurity to ML is actually what we call responsible use. You may have had it. So responsible use is you can actually develop your machine learning model, use the right set of data, but the application of the outcome of the machine learning is applied to different demography from what you intended to use. So is that regulatory framework that allows you to use ML in the right way, responsible ML. And also the other bit I want to touch on is the trustworthiness. Can you interpret and explain the outcome to the users, intended users of that framework or that model? It's similar to the GDPR. If you're going to use my data, I need to know what you're using my data for. The other way, conversely, if you're going to apply ML model that would influence somebody's credit rating, they need to know why. They also need an explanation to say, we believe that this is right because we saw that 2 of these data points tracks to your credit rating 2 years ago because you didn't pay a loan. They own that explanation. And that's what brings the faith and trust into ML. So we apply both cybersecurity and AI governance within our machine learning ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. So that's applying cybersecurity to machine learning, but how about the other way around? Do you also apply machine learning for cybersecurity audits?
Yes, definitely. So we use ML to help us dictate what normal and abnormal is. So imagine that one example, trivial example, is in volumetrics. So you have data that come from employee, and if you are in multi-geographies, so the data goes during the peak time, this is how much data you normally process. And during the off hours, this is how much data you process. Any abnormal spike there, the ML will highlight you to say there is an abnormal spike, you go and investigate. Because there are 2 things. One is either somebody trying to exfiltrate data, copy data out of that place, or there is a process that's gone wrong. But either way, it will prompt you to go and look at it. We also use it in security monitoring. where we have what we call user behavioral analytics. So today, most of us work from different places remotely instead of on-site, and people can be logging in from different geographies. So what ML does is looks at the fingerprint, it looks at where you've logged in. It says Vishnu is logging in from Silicon Valley, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning, but Cyril is here. How come I've seen Vishnu again, 2 minutes logging in again from the UK? Is impossible travel. He couldn't have traveled even if he flew Concorde and Concorde was there. So it started to tell you that, no, that's abnormal. That's why I talked about symptomatic observations that trigger. It also looks at you and it says, I have your history, and you normally use Mac to log on, and this is the particular browser you use. All of a sudden, I'm now seeing you log on with a different type of browser. How come you're not running Chrome? You're not running Firefox. It will bring those things to the consciousness of the analyst to investigate those subtleties. Whilst they might be benign, but at least there's a trigger for us to go and investigate. We also use it in what we call event monitoring. So it triggers various scenarios that we've set up based on our policy to trigger. And machine learning then checks those data, and any deviation, it's get alerted to users, analysts to investigate. So we use it in multiple ways.
Yeah, looks like the predominant way is outlier detection. So you basically detect outliers.
We also use it not just in outliers detection, but we also use it in heuristics, in learning. So it learns new things and it flags new things for you. Type.
Okay. And your requirement for interpretability of the models is, that's really required. So how do you measure the interpretability of models?
So one aspect is still in flight, is we involve the SMEs of that area. So if you're solving a problem, so maybe the problem you're trying to solve is to understand who is using our service. So we go to the domain expert in that area and we tell them, what do you use to measure those? And they will tell us is the number of clicks they use, is the number of services they click, and it's that. So we bring those things to bear. So when the prediction happens, we will be speaking it in the language of what we call the citizen data owners, rather than speaking in the language of machine learning. So it's not going to be, oh, there is 0.5 prediction. No, it's saying that we've seen this click and that's a customer click, this customer click. Having these 2 clicks at the same time is why we believe that customer have accessed this and accessed that. So we'll speak it in the business language speak. That's how we explain explainability rather than interpreting the model efficiency, if you see what I mean. It's not whether the model was able to predict something, it's interpreting what that prediction means in a layman's language, applicable to that particular domain of interest.
Oh, okay. So it looks like it's quite an expensive operation, right? And bringing the domain expert into the picture and doing, so is it really practically done in your experience? Bringing in?
It's yes and no. One of the things we advocate is having a fusion team. So you have a fusion team that comprises the domain experts of the area, the ML and data science people, and the business people working together, because that's the only way to actually solve a real life problem. I'll give you an example. If you work in a bank, you will understand the bank policies and the bank practices better than the machine learning guy that you just employed 3 months ago. The machine learning guy is going to use the data to do the model and then get an answer prediction. But when you come in to explain how that is relevant to the customer, you need a fusion team. You need people from multidisciplinary facets working on it as a problem statement from a business angle. And that's what we've seen work better.
Okay. So there's a question on the chat window. It reads, if you give artificial intelligence too much freedom and availability of data, can it become dangerous to the point that security of systems can be compromised? Can artificial intelligence modify the original data that it was originally trained on?
Good question.
Yeah.
It's possible, but it depends on the area of application. So what that person is trying to ask is, yes, it can be a problem if you gave a machine free rein. Let me give a concise example of where we've applied it and where we have moderated it. So robotic process automation, RPA, we deployed RPA in our environment. But what we mentioned is we had a policy that says an RPA cannot create another RPA account and authorize payment. So because the RPA can create another RPA account, and this RPA raises an invoice, and then this other RPA would approve it, and that could lead to a fraud. So what we've done is to say, the first policy is that no RPA can create another new account. So if you want to create an account, it's a human administrator that will create an RPA account, and no RPA can authorize the other RPA. So that way it's like multi-step chain attack. We control the what we call blast radius. Blast radius is when one singular thing has a reverberating effect over a myriad of different other things. Without those controls, human controls and policy controls, yes, that is a possibility that it could happen.
Yeah, I hope that answers the question. So I think there are no questions on YouTube or on the chat window in Zoom. And anyway, we are kind of, we used up all the time that you allotted for us. So we wish to thank you a lot for the insights provided in this talk. It was really very insightful and very practical exposure to how audit trails are done.
Yes, Cyril, it was very thorough, and I appreciate especially the question and answer period. Excellent.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for joining us on this early morning in Silicon Valley. I think most of you are from Silicon Valley, looks like. I was just browsing through the participants list on Eventbrite, and most of them were from Silicon Valley. So it's really appreciated that you joined so early. There's also a participant from India, I believe. So it's good to see all of you here, and hopefully we'll meet again next month. Thank you, Cyril, again, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back probably in one of the future seminars as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Goodbye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.